In the 1982 journal publication The Subject and Power, French philosopher Michel Foucault argues that the exercise of power can never do without violence or consent, often both at the same time. In other words, the enactment of agency cannot exist without either forcibly overriding or securing the consent of the party whose own agency is being overturned. Many power structures in video games affirm this assertion through their gameplay elements and narrative structures. There is an inherent set of conventions, often outlined in a game's core mechanics and objectives, that define the ways that we engage with interactive media and leverage our power as players. However, in turning inward, I'd argue that the relationship between a game's player operator and its in-world avatar is the most immediate and profound example of power exerted through violence or consent. Enter the turn-based indie role-playing game Deltarune. Before delving into what makes Deltarune's player-protagonist interactions compelling, though, it's important to orient ourselves in the broader conversation of avatar embodiment, specifically within what media historian Sheila Murphy has coined identity politics. Fundamentally, identity politics explores how players engage with in-game avatars and project aspects of themselves onto their virtual bodies. It also addresses the methods, whether mechanical, technical, or narrative, through which a game might facilitate or disrupt player avatar reciprocity. In the case of Deltarune, the player controls an adolescent named Chris, the only human in a small town of monsters, as they encounter and navigate across escapist fantasy realms known as Dark Worlds. They move using directional keys, interact with objects by pressing Z, and, crucially to our argument, respond to prompts and dictate decisions made by Chris inside and outside of battle. By enacting the game's mission of sealing these dark worlds, they are, in Murphy's words, leaving the meat of their body behind in exchange for a perfect virtual body, one where they identify as both player and character simultaneously. And yet, the merge of these entities is purposely reinforced and estranged by the, at times obscure, use of you in the game's flavor text. The second-person pronoun you in Deltarune may invoke any one of three possible subjects. I've depicted them using the split subject model developed by assistant professor in media and cultural industries at the University of Groningen, Lars de Wild. The interpreting subject, or player subject, is the player you existing beyond the confines of the screen, the one interpreting or constraining the possible significations of a text. The played subject, Chris, is the you that represents the avatar as a character, subject to being played and interpreted. Lastly, the playing subject you is the physical avatar serving as the point of interpolation for breaching the world of the game. It is simultaneously a living vessel for the player to occupy and a lived person in the program's diegesis. This framework, according to de Wild, forms the crux of the wider video game tradition. However, whereas other games incorporate this blueprint for identity enactment to delineate gameplay and narrative, Deltarune blurs this divide by recontextualizing the split subject model as a struggle for agency between the player's subject and the played subject over a jointly occupied player avatar. It's in this manner that the violence and coercion mentioned by Foucault in the opening vignette becomes the means through which player and played subject attempt to reclaim control over their shared vessel. Despite this, the conflict between the player's subject as Chris and Chris as the played subject often goes unnoticed by players on an initial playthrough, at least until the conclusion of Chapter 1. Before this reveal, though, the game attempts to perpetuate an understanding of Chris as a vehicle for player embodiment. Chris's side of their shared bedroom is nearly barren, as though it were a blank slate to be improved upon. The flavor text, "It's only you," appears after inspecting the mirror in the hallway outside their bedroom. In the Dark World, the stat menu includes the descriptor, "Level 1 human, body contains a soul." And, perhaps most chillingly, players must overwrite a pre-existing save file labeled Chris with their inputted name to record progress. However, the avenues of autonomy presented to the player avatar reveal a subtextual reading of Chris contrary to that of a self-projection. Other characters are inclined to comment on Chris's behavior if the player engages with the world in a way that is uncharacteristic of them. Consumable healing items can heal Chris for more or less than they would other party members. Certain dialogue options may be highlighted or dramatized to imply that they are truer to Chris's proclivities. And, depending on the response, characters might remark on their tone or facial expression while saying them. There are even moments when the avatar's body moves on its own without player input. Through these instances, the interests of Chris as a character are revealed to be wholly or partially opposed to the player's presence and control. And when Chris tears the player's soul from their chest, severing the connection to their body as they glare menacingly through the screen, they are foregrounding that the relationship between player and played subject hasn't always been one based on mutual consent. It's instead a pointed reminder that, in a world where kindness doesn't always win, and where personal agency is not always guaranteed, there are just some people that you have to fight, including yourself.